Mr Deputy Speaker, last night's revelations about children being kept in watch houses made me sick to my stomach. Kids locked up for up to 40 days in our watch houses. Children trying to hang themselves in police stations. A girl locked in the same room as two alleged sexual predators. We are talking about children as young as 10 and some with a mental age of around 6. Primary school-age kids traumatised by the system, a system that the Palaszczuk Labor government has inflicted on them. And I say to the Premier today, get these kids out of the watch houses. Mr Deputy Speaker, today the Premier failed the test of leadership. The Premier should have come into this House and she should have explained to Queenslanders why the justice system is a national embarrassment. But in the Premier's ministerial statement, Mr Deputy Speaker—
Order, member for Thurngett.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in the Premier's ministerial statement, what did the Premier say about the children who have been locked up 24/7 with the lights on for up to 40 days? The Premier was deathly silent. The Premier was deathly silent, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Premier has failed the test of leadership. Now, we know that the system is failing these children. These children should not be in the watch houses. A system that is brutalising children and pushing our police to breaking point. Everyone responsible for this shocking state of affairs should hang their heads in shame. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, those people are not hard to find. This isn't a whodunit. We know exactly who to blame, and that is the Palaszczuk Labor government. The Premier, her police minister and her youth minister. They have all created this crisis. This is all down to them, and they cannot say they were not warned. The LNP told the Palaszczuk government not to remove 17-year-olds from adult prisons without a plan. But the Palaszczuk Labor government didn't listen. They never do. Mr Deputy Speaker, they didn't listen to the Public Guardian after she wrote to the Director-General of the Department of the Attorney-General and Justice. They didn't listen when she wrote to the Director-General of the Premier's own department. The question that needs answering is, what action did the Premier take after being notified of these warnings? The Public Guardian wrote that she could not sleep at night because of what is happening in our watch houses. But it seems anyone involved with the Palaszczuk Labor government and the ministers, they just simply weren't worried. Labor lit the fuse for this crisis. They've stood back and they've ignored the warnings. Just a week ago, Mr Deputy Speaker, the police minister said that 10-year-olds were not being held in watch houses. If the police minister doesn't know what is going on in our watch houses, then how on earth will this mess ever be fixed? The youth minister, Mr Deputy Speaker, is simply no better. The youth minister seemed shell-shocked on last night's show, and for anyone that watched it, a national embarrassment. The Palaszczuk Labor government is a national embarrassment, and no more so than the Minister for Youth. I wasn't told about this, she said. And then she said again, oh no, I wasn't told about that. This is a youth minister who has no plan to fix the crisis and no guarantees when it will be fixed. It is clear they don't even have a clue about what has happened. I'll explain it to them. It isn't that complicated. No. Our police stations were not built to hold children for 4 days, let alone 40 days. Our police officers are not trained to be childminders or counsellors for up to 40 days. The LNP.
Order, members.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the LNP warned the Premier not to remove 17-year-olds from adult prisons without a plan. The police, the hard-working police in this great state, have been warning the government about this crisis in making. And whose crisis is it, Mr Deputy Speaker? It is a crisis of the Palaszczuk Labor government. Mr Deputy Speaker, the detention of 17-year-old offenders in our prisons was far more humane than Labor's heartless regime. They were held separately from adult prisoners. They were guarded, they were supervised, and very importantly, Mr Deputy Speaker, they were educated by properly trained staff. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, they were certainly safer than where they're being held right now. This incompetent, this arrogant and this negligent government has made a dreadful decision. And it's time the Premier stood up, showed some leadership and took responsibility for this failed decision. Mr Deputy Speaker, we know that this government have only been so interested in passing a human rights bill. Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it was the Youth Minister last night on that Four Corners show who actually said, what bill? Oh, we don't have that yet. Oh, the starting date, Charterboat, that starting date isn't until the 1st of next year. Well, isn't the Youth Minister lucky that it's not retrospective, Mr Deputy Speaker? Instead of worrying about the children that are being held in light-filled rooms for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, instead of that, they're more worried about passing a bill that their own government's policies would not even pass. Mr Deputy Speaker, I say it's a national shame. Mr Deputy Speaker, our youth crime crisis is not just confined to police watchhouses. It's on our streets too. Now, I've tabled my second petition today, and there's another petition tomorrow in relation to the juvenile crime and the growing tide of youth crime in my local community in and around the South Burnett. Now, the residents there, they want a curfew of 10 p.m. for their township. They want more police at night. They want more police in the community at weekends. And our local police want more support. Mr Deputy Speaker, from the Brisbane watchhouses to the streets of Mergen, the Palaszczuk Labor government is presiding over a crime and detention crisis, and I urge the Palaszczuk Labor government not to ignore this warning like it ignores so many other warnings. And on the issue of human rights, Mr Deputy Speaker, there's nothing more precious than the right of freedom to be able to talk to our politicians, freedom of speech. But in Queensland, you now know that you have to be careful which politician you speak to. Don't dare say a word to any Labor leaders. If you do, you'll be locked out of your desk, and your desk will be cleared out before you know anything about it. Now, today in this chamber, we heard Minister Bailey actually say that the Gladstone Port suspended a contract with the company. Now, who ordered that suspension? Was it Minister Bailey? Or was it the other shareholding minister, the Deputy Premier? Mr Deputy Speaker, maybe it was the Treasurer of this
Order,
state,
members.
the member for South Brisbane who picked up the call, picked up the phone. Yes, Bill. Yes, Bill. Yes, Bill, you've spoken out. I know we organised that man to talk to you, and he said something about tax because the Labor Party love to tax Queenslanders. And yet this Queenslander, this hard-working Queenslander, stood up for the other workers in Queensland, and what happened to him? Gone. He got sacked. The contract, the hard-working company that had a contract with Gladstone Port, they got suspended. And which shareholding minister is responsible? Is it the one that took the fall this morning, Minister Bailey, or was it the Treasurer of Queensland? Well, those are the answers that the people of Queensland would like to know. Or maybe it was the Premier, but we know she doesn't like to make decisions.
Order. Order. Thank you, members.